Listen up. It's time for a politically entertaining exclusive interview.
Extremely grateful to have this guest back on with us again. He is the Republican Senator from South Carolina, Senator Tim Scott. We want to thank you for coming back on the show. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. It's always good to be on the show with the two of you guys. You guys are dynamite together, so I know you guys have probing questions. I'm happy to answer the ones that I like. Not all of them, but I like.
Okay, let's see how many of them you like. The last time you were on here, not long after you did the interview with us, you gave a 3-part speech on the floor about your interactions with police. How was that speech received overall, and what has your interactions with law enforcement been like since you gave that speech last year?
I think the receptivity for the speech overall was very positive. I think it was eye-opening for a lot of folks. It seemed like a part of my speech, especially the second one, where I talked about my 7 stops in 1 year as an elected official, seemed to validate the concerns of other men of color that they had been talking about for a long time, which was a part of the impetus for my speech. I will also say that, of course, there was some blowback that you should expect that anytime you step out into terrain that is not the normal terrain for a conservative like myself to step out there. So I should have expected some blowback, and I certainly got it. But overall, I think it's positive. My relationship with law enforcement continues to be, I think, a good one, a positive one. While I have had some really challenging interactions, I would say that I've also had the most amazing interactions as well. So I tried my best to give a clear and positive perspective on law enforcement overall while addressing a needed issue, because even though I'm a big supporter of law enforcement, I'm also going to have to be the guy that tells the truth, even when it's the hard truth.
I thought it was very effective. Something else you shared on the floor earlier this year, actually, you received some very vicious comments directed at you during the Secretary of Education vote, Betsy Devos. What prompted you to share those comments? And also, what are your thoughts on students graduating that booed her at Bethune-Cookman, or the students that walked out on Vice President Pence at Notre Dame? What are your thoughts on actions like those, and what prompted you to share those comments with us on the floor?
I think sometimes it's easy for us to demonize other folks, and when we're doing the demonizing, it's easy to live in a glass house. And when I started sharing the folks who had been so vicious in their comments about me, I noticed that some of them started deleting their Twitter handle, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
Because everybody feels good in anonymity, but no one feels good in broad daylight when they're doing things that they know that they cannot be proud of. I wanted to accomplish a couple of things. Number one, I wanted people to know that the process of my decision was a painful one that brought with it a lot of abuse. Number two, I made my decision not based in a vacuum. It was less about Betsy Devos or other candidates. It was more about being in a position of influence and using it as effectively as possible, realizing that the real culprit to bad policy is not the Secretary of Education. It's Congress who sets the policy. So I wanted to make sure that I brought some perspective to the actual challenges that sometimes we face and where to place the blame or where the credit should be had. So that was a big part of it. And the second part of your question?
The response she received at Bethune-Cookman and the students walking out at Notre Dame, what do you think of those type of actions? Yeah.
I think everybody has it's a free country, as they say, right? So you have the right to walk out whenever you want to. I spoke at an HBCU this year myself, and fortunately the students remained in their seats, but they were not necessarily all excited about my presence. Here's my thought. I think we ought to be very careful when we decide to walk out or turn our backs on people that we disagree with. If the only people you want to hear from are those folks that reinforce your current worldview, you will have a very narrow and shallow worldview. So even when we disagree with folks, let's give them the respect that we want people to give us. And by doing so, it says more about who you are than who's making the presentation. And of course, the opposite is true as well. When you walk out, it says more about who you are than it does the speaker.
Hey, Senator, this is Frank. I'm going to jump in here. And one of the things that, we talked about last time on the show, we talked about, the African-American vote and voting Republican, and how the African-American vote has been, largely slanted towards the Democratic Party for years and years, really since the Civil Rights Movement. But what I wanted to say is, okay, so after this last election, and with the appointment of, say, an Attorney General like Jeff Sessions, as an African-American, when you have somebody like, say, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, who is now rolling back things like the fair sentencing, and he's trying to reintroduce mandatory minimums, which we know unfairly targets minorities, especially African Americans and Hispanics. What is the real, I guess, what do you feel like is the real advantage now? Is the Republican Party, is it where it needs to be in your mind, for the African American voters can feel comfortable saying, you know what, I'm going to vote conservatively because they have my best interest in mind, when you see some of the policies that may be implemented or be rolling out now?
Yeah, I think I get the gist of the question. At the end of the day, here's what I believe. I believe the reality of it is this new direction from the Attorney General will have a disproportionate impact on African Americans without much of a question. But however, that this disproportionate impact has changed drastically as the opioid debate continues to rage. That you have a whole new group of folks who will be negatively impacted by this debate. And that is one part of the conversation that I will watch very closely as we start addressing a new drug conversation that is typically not inner city, not people of color, that will have a lasting impact on who we are as a country, just as the earlier debate and disagreements and challenges around the crack versus cocaine disparity. So it's a new day in this country that will hopefully bring many of us together on looking for ways for criminal justice reform. As it relates specifically to the party, I would suggest that the challenges that we face in recruiting people of color to the party will not rest on the actions of any one individual, certainly not the Attorney General. It will be our overall approach to very difficult issues. And do we find ourselves encouraging enthusiastically the participation of people who have different views, yet remain connected and committed to a conservative narrative? Can we attract those folks into the party? I think we do that. As I spoke at the graduation at an HBCU, I heard the normal challenges that you hear from African Americans about being a Republican. But when we were walking down and walking out, one of the pastors turned to me and said, we need some help. Can you do blah, blah, blah? And I was like, weren't you just yelling at me a few minutes ago? He says, yeah, you just got to know your audience, number one. Number two, you do realize that African Americans have done just as good under Republican presidents as we have under Democrats. And then he went through the entire 2013 challenge that the HBCU presidents had with the Obama administration, cutting nearly $200 million out of their funding because of some administrative decisions that they made that had a negative impact on HBCUs. And so in the end, what I've learned is that while we have folks that are cheerleaders on one side, the proof is in the pudding, and the proof suggests that there's been equal progress and equal pain under both administrations, both Republican and Democrat. And the pastor that I was talking about was certainly not the president of the HBCU. So I don't want to conflate those two into one person.
Senator Tim Scott with us. We're running up against time. Had so many questions for you. I'll leave you with this one because it's a big topic that's coming up right before the August recess, and that is health care. We know the House passed a health care bill a few weeks ago, and the Senate is currently working on one. How do you respond to people who say, why not just improve with what's wrong with Obamacare instead of starting all the way over and tearing it down and starting from scratch?
Yeah, I think it's a valid question, and let's do this again, and maybe in the next 3-4 weeks or so, I'll have my team stay in touch with you guys and your team. I will say that all questions about the process are legitimate questions because we are talking about something that is vitally important to the average person. It's their access to health care. So the reasons why I would tell you that improving the current health care law is quite difficult is because the Congressional Budget Office came to the conclusion, with all the gyrations around the health care bill that preceded the election, by the way, that it was unsustainable. So about 2 years ago, CBO came out with a report that said they just could not no longer score the health care law, which means that, as we've seen all around the country, folks are jumping ship. Health insurance companies are leaving the market. So while the plan that has been passed in the House has been criticized for having fewer people covered, the truth is that if we maintain the status quo of Obamacare, then we find ourselves in a position of having no coverage at all under that current health care law because it was going to implode. So what we've done, I think, is taken the most compassionate approach of having a serious fight in our chambers about what is the right direction for health care reform and making sure that gave access, quality access, to as many people as possible.
Very well. We will be keeping our eyes on that and see what happens. We can't thank you enough for coming on with us, and we hope to talk to you again. But from just sincerely, thank you for coming on, sir, and we'll try to talk to you again.
Yes, sir. Well, let's try this back again in June. We'll have a little more time, hopefully.